In this video, I will talk about the CSS padding and margin property. The padding is the inside space around the content of an element. Every element essentially is a box, and inside that box, between the content and the edge, we have padding. If you look at my first div element, you will notice that the text inside is very squashed in there. There is no room at all. That is because we are looking at the default padding. And the default padding is approximately 1 pixel on all 4 sides, which does not give us much room. If you were not using a background color, padding would not be an issue. But we generally do either use background colors or borders, and therefore the padding would be evident. In CSS, you can set the padding property to the individual sides, padding hyphen top, padding hyphen right, padding hyphen bottom, padding hyphen left. Notice that in CSS, when a property consists of 2 words, it is hyphenated. If you look at my second div element, you will notice there is a generous amount of space inside this element or box. I have set 5 pixels of padding at the top, 30 pixels of padding on the right, 50 pixels on the bottom, and 80 pixels on the left. In CSS, you can use a shortcut to set padding. So rather than using the individual sides, if you wanted to set the padding for all 4 sides to different values, you could use the property padding followed by the 4 different values for the 4 different sides. I would like to point out that these values are not comma separated. They are space separated, and should you enter a comma, it will not work. The order in which these are applied is in clockwise order, top, right, bottom, left. So it makes it relatively easy to understand. You also have the ability to set a shortcut for the padding property that would only have 3 values. In this case, the values would be applied as follows. The first value would be applied to the top. The second value would be applied to the right and left. The third value would be applied to the bottom. We also have the ability to apply padding with only 2 values. So if 2 values were applied to the padding property, this is how these values would be applied. The first value would be applied to the top and bottom. The second value would be applied to the right and left. We also can apply just 1 value to the padding. In this case, all 4 sides would have that same value. And in many situations, this is what you would probably be doing. You would probably want some kind of symmetrical padding inside your container, and you would probably want all 4 sides to be the same. The CSS margin property. The margin is the space on the outside of the element. And that will vary based on the element. Some elements have a wide margin, such as your heading level elements and paragraphs. Most of your HTML5 structural elements have virtually no margin, as does this div. If we look at this div with a yellow background, and you will notice that I have 2 span elements placed, one on the top and one on the bottom, so that you can actually see how close this margin is. And you're looking at approximately 2 pixels default on all 4 sides, which is not very much. So depending on the element, it might be too close to what is on the top of it or what is on the bottom of it, and you might want to adjust the margin. The CSS margin property is used in place of the break element, a BR element. Do not use line breaks in order to distance your elements. Use the margin property. The CSS margin properties take the same syntax and format as the padding properties. We can set the individual 4 sides. If you look at the second div, you can see that there is a generous margin from the top and bottom, right and left, because it has been set using CSS. We also have the margin shortcut. So if you wanted to apply 4 different values, you can use the margin property followed by 4 values. These values are not comma separated, they are space separated. The order in which these values would be applied, top, right, bottom, left, it goes in clockwise order. You can also set 3 values for the margin property. In this case, the first value is applied to the top. The second value is applied to both the right and left. The third value is applied to the bottom. You can apply 2 values to the margin property. In this case, the first value is applied to the top and bottom. The second value is applied to the right and left. You can also apply 1 value to the margin property. In this case, that value will be applied to all 4 sides. And in many instances, you might want symmetrical margins on all 4 sides, and you might want to use the margin property set to 1 value. In many other instances, you might want an equal margin on the top and bottom, a separate equal margin on the right and left. In that case, you might use 2 values for the margin property. So the CSS margin property and padding property are extremely useful in page layout.